When we see something and fully accept it and experience it, it morphs right in front of us. And this is a very simple principle that takes a circuitous route to get to. You can't just say that to someone and they get it. You have to have the substance of experience. And so part of the magic of working with people for me is the context of that dialogue I'm having with someone is where we look. Both of us are looking and seeing and letting things come in and letting the unconscious speak its voice as well. And what we're really doing in that reflection is seeing and accepting the truth of what has been our experience. And it begins to morph. We can complete our emotional experience in life, and this is kind of the road to removing the imprints that we've had about love. I published a few books in the 90s, and it put me on the road teaching experiential seminars. And somewhere along the way, I was given the opportunity to just kind of create as I went along. So every year I'd create something new. And I created a retreat called The Soul in Love. I was using all that insight I had about people's capacity to change around their ability to love. And so I thought, well, why not bring it all together under one roof? And it was like a 5-day retreat at Esalen Institute, beautiful environment on the Big Sur coast, a place I would teach maybe every season. So I really appreciate the synergy that happens in groups. And it was mind-blowing what happened in that first retreat. I didn't expect this at all, but first of all, we all fell in love with each other. We all were witnesses to each other's deep stories and created such a safe atmosphere, which can happen in a group, that things came up. The tenderness of those stories that came up moved us all to such a degree that I realized I had stumbled on something. And the feedback from everyone was just fabulous. And it wasn't about me. I don't have a lot of ego involved in doing the work. I'm really trying to be invisible in the room. But it was what happened for each person. They actually, I would say, we helped, just the 25 of us, helped each other extinguish some intense, even traumatic moments, imprints. And people were liberated, not just short term, but it started a process. And I began to hear from people who were in that group over maybe the next year. I realized that this is it. This is the core of what I've been working toward in terms of having a form that affects all areas of our lives. Not just self-esteem and self-love, but the way we carry ourselves in the world as compassionate or not compassionate creatures. It's so quintessential, the material, that I couldn't resist it as a therapist in terms of my writing. And I began to write about it. But more importantly, I've always valued the experiential process of how we can become more true to that longing we have to love. If we came here for love, and that longing is strong, it's obviously buried in most of us. You know, it's actually a it's actually a physical experience, that longing. About 3 fingers below the belly button is where you can begin to experience it when you really have peeled back layers. It's what we dream of. You know, as an analyst, I'm practiced in receiving people's dreams, and at the core of the dreaming, I was finding the reflection over the years that longing was unrequited, and that when I really made progress with people, we were working on the love problem. It wasn't about their professional life. It wasn't even about their relationships per se. It was about those defective love moments that seared into their soul, or maybe even that 5-year-old who is aware that they're not being loved for just being themselves. That amounts to an annihilating experience to a tender young ego. It's something that if we really let it in, that no one's paying attention, no one gets us, it deconstructs our sense of self. So that's why most of us have figured ways to defend against being betrayed or abandoned that way. It's really a core abandonment when a child realizes that. And then there's a pattern set into motion. Think of it this way, that we wake up in a household, it imprints on us. We develop certain beliefs. And beliefs are trances, they're trance states. And we've all come out of environments, we're always in some form of belief or trance. And some of these destructive trances have their origins in our early years. in that first retreat, what astounded all of us was we thought we'd be talking about broken hearts and, betrayal in adult relationships, and that we'd be, just giving a sympathetic ear. But almost every story to the last one was from, let's say, before adolescence. And so when we did the Dreamtime journey and people had a chance to go deeply, that's what came to them, and that's what we worked on. So I've continued to elaborate on that initial retreat. I've gone pretty much around the world teaching the love journey. And the form that I've used, because I'm working with that capacity, like I said, psychological change, that capacity to love, expanding that. And over time, I've realized, and this crosses all national boundaries, all language resistance, and it's the same everywhere. That longing is very strong. And if you have two legs, you're driven toward connection. We're like doves. We usually do it one-on-one, so there's a coupling drive that we're working with, and a lot of the substance or the laboratory for this material is going to be in your relational life. That's where it matters, to actually create a container for your soul with another person. That's the archetype. We could call that the marriage archetype. There is an archetype of how two people actually create a vessel for both of their souls, for their continued enlargement. And what will often come up in relationship will be some of these injuries that you've sustained in your capacity to love. You'll feel the constraint of some of the limitations about really opening your heart and taking risks and being vulnerable. And it's often the demise of relationship that we will hit those trance states, those beliefs. And by the way, in trance language, we call that an age regression trance. Something will happen between you and another person. It'll trigger you, and you revert back to an old belief system, an old set of behaviors about how to behave around love. It's when two people actually begin to develop relationship and it gets to the point where they're actually in a creative dialogue that includes conflict, that includes activating each other. And this is where a lot of us fall short on the skills actually to dialogue with another person to move through those, let's say, triggered trance states.